Namaskar. Welcome to the Embassy Weekly Online. Today we'd like to touch upon the Russian President's meeting with the German Chancellor in Moscow and his important remarks at the news conference. Russia-Belarus Military Exercise Union Courage 2022 will provide you some updates on Russia's negotiations with the United States and NATO on the legally binding security guarantees, and we'll speak about the biased media coverage of the so-called Russian invasion into Ukraine. So keep tuned, follow our links that we'll share in description, and of course don't hesitate to leave your comments below. This week Russian President Vladimir Putin had a number of interactions with his foreign counterparts. It started with talks with Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany Olaf Scholz on February 15. The discussion focused on topical issues of the bilateral and the international agenda. The sides also exchanged views on the situation with Russia's initiatives and proposals to the United States and NATO regarding the provision of long-term, legally binding security guarantees.
Russia can't turn away from the fact that the United States and North Atlantic Treaty Organization are interpreting the key principles of the indivisibility of security that is stipulated in many pan-European documents. This principle stipulates that there is not only a freedom to choose ways to enhance its own security and to join any military alliances, which our counterparts are talking a lot, but also the obligation not to enhance the state security at the expense of the others. And NATO is talking about their policy of open doors, and we know about Article 10 of the treaty, and I have mentioned it already during my previous press conferences after we held talks with our European partners, and there is nothing of the kind in the Article 10. They can invite someone, but they don't have to. That's the gist of it. And trying to deter Russia, we see it as the direct threat to the national security, and we want to resolve it by the legally binding agreement based on our draft proposals. And the response we got from the United States and other NATO members regarding the security guarantees do not respond to our three basic requirements, but in the response that we've got, there is still, and we heard it from the foreign minister yesterday, there are a number of ideas, concepts, and we are... It's not that we want to discuss them. We were the ones who came up with the initiative to discuss them regarding the matters of European security, regarding the matters of certain types of weapons. I'm talking about the short-range and medium-range missiles. We are ready to talk about these matters and more. We're also ready to talk about, to continue negotiations, but all the matters, as it's been said earlier, they must be considered in complex without going away from the main proposals from Russia, implementation of which is priority to us.
Vladimir Putin also commented the news that members of the State Duma, lower house of the Russian parliament, supported the decision to forward an appeal to President to consider recognizing the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics as sovereign and independent states.
The members of the parliament, like in any other country, they think about the opinions of the voters, and they feel it. They can sense it, and it's quite obvious. In our country, the vast majority of people, they feel for the people of the Donbass, they support them, and they hope that the situation there will change drastically for the better. And I will come from the assumption that we should do everything to resolve the problems of Donbass, but resolve them, like Mr. Federal Chancellor said, first of all, coming from the fact that there is still not all the opportunities exhausted in implementation of Minsk agreements, and we should hope that our partners from across the ocean and from Europe, first of all Germany and France, will try to influence the current Kyiv authorities, and we will be able to find this solution.
On February 14, Russian President Vladimir Putin had a working meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. They discussed the response by the US and NATO to Russian proposals for long-term, legally binding security guarantees. When asked by the head of state whether there is a chance to reach an agreement with Western partners, the minister was quoted as saying, "There is always a chance." In a few days after, on February 17, US Ambassador to Russia was invited to the Russian Foreign Ministry, where he was presented with the written reply to the previously received US response on security guarantees. The full text of it you will find on the Ministry's website. In general characteristics, it was noted that the United States has failed to meet constructive response to the basic elements of the Russia-drafted treaty. The United States has disregarded the packaged nature of the Russian proposals, intentionally picking out only the convenient topics, which in turn were twisted to create advantages for the United States and its allies. Besides, in that document, Russia expressed its concern about the increasing US and NATO military activity in the direct vicinity of Russia's borders, whereas its red lines, core security interests and sovereign right to defend them continue to be ignored. The ultimatums on withdrawing Russian forces from certain areas of Russia's territory, accompanied with threats to toughen sanctions, are unacceptable and undermine the prospects of reaching genuine agreements. It was stressed that in case of lack of readiness on the part of the United States and its allies to come to terms to firm and legally binding guarantees on Russia's security, Moscow will have to respond, including by implementing certain military technical measures. With regard to the joint Russia-Belarus military exercise Union Courage 2022, we would like to underline that they are being carried out in full accordance with the proclaimed concept, which was announced in advance. Russia has never avoided explaining the nature of any measures to strengthen the joint defense of the Union state. Military attachés for defense at the embassies of foreign states in Belarus and media representatives were invited to the practical actions as observers. Unfortunately, only a few of foreign media were interested in giving a full and unbiased picture of what is really going on the ground. Thus, we would like to draw your attention to the statement issued by the Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson, Major General Igor Konashenkov. First of all, he noted that the joint Russia-Belarus exercise aimed to practice the repelling aggression against the Union state during a defensive operation. He also explained the main events of the exercise, when and where they are held. Importantly, he informed that as the combat training measures are completed, the troops, as always, will make marches in a combined way to the points of permanent deployment. Some of them have already loaded onto rail and drone transport and moved to their military garrisons. Today we mark yet another day of Russia's non-aggression against Ukraine. This situation around false warnings and hysteria already triggered tons of memes all around social media. On the one hand, this is laughably absurd, while being terribly sad on the other. It has been a long time since we saw such an amount of fakes, disinformation and planted stories. The West and its media, including those who were blindly copying their publications, were very active in disseminating such materials, exploiting this topic as much as they can, even dragging aliens and UFO. Interestingly, both Russia and Ukraine have been saying at all possible levels that there will be no war, that nobody would invade anyone or had any invasion plans. However, these statements didn't stop the Western propaganda machine. More to say, even the situation with the departure of deputy head of the US diplomatic mission from Moscow was presented in some media as almost a deliberate escalation step by the Russian side. and only a few of them mentioned that the American diplomat left Russia strictly in response to the unreasonable expulsion of the Minister Council of our embassy in Washington. Luckily, you have an option to check all the fakes made by the Western media. Russian Foreign Ministry published materials describing how the foreign news agencies and the mass disinformation media, as we will call them from now on with due regret, were fomenting hysteria. We do hope that media will show more professionalism, thoughtfulness, wisdom if you like, and will stop duplicating groundless insinuations. These actions do not contribute anyhow to peaceful resolution of the conflict in Donbass and the entire situation regarding Europe's security and stability. They should think more of real problems, think about real situation on the ground. Think about the fact that, for example, in past few days, the situation along the contact line in the eastern Ukraine took a turn for the worse, with a number of ceasefire violations by the Kiev government troops were registered in Lugansk and Donetsk. This Friday, the evacuation of the republic's inhabitants to Russia was announced, citing the increasing threat of hostilities. That is real, and that is really worth of the unbiased media coverage.